With the recent discussion about how Donald Trump wants to annex Canada and Greenland and the Panama Canal for whatever reason, I wanted to talk about something that has been ongoing. How DC is treated in the whole American experiment. As you know, the 23rd Amendment only gave them the ability to vote for president via the Electoral College in the 1960s onward, despite DC having more people than Vermont and Wyoming. Yet, it still lacks federal representation in Congress, making our national capital rub elbows with the various territories. Same territories, mind you, who were basically told by SCOTUS over 100 years ago that you are alien races incompatible with American values, so we can curtail your rights no matter what. But getting back on topic, America's not the only federal democratic republic on the globe. Let's see how other federal republics treat their federal districts. First off, Canada. Much like America, Canada is a federal system divided into provinces and territories. However, they are a parliamentary system, but they still have a federal state, so let's see how they handle their national capital. Their national capital of Ottawa is actually part of the Ontario province, and thus they get representation at the city level with their mayors, the provincial parliament, and the actual federal parliament. The capital of the province is located in Toronto, not in Ottawa, so there is somewhat of a dual power. One is for federal affairs, the other is for provincial affairs. Next up is our neighbors to the south. Let's see what the Mexicans do with Mexico City. So Mexico City is the federal capital of Mexico. Seems easy enough. Mexico consists of 31 Mexican states plus Mexico City, which is a federal district. Much like America, Mexico's constitution carved out the city to be only a federal district, not a state. If Wikipedia is anything to go by, they basically adopted this from the US Constitution. And Article 44 of the Mexican Constitution stipulates no statehood unless the capital moves somewhere else and that becomes a federal district. However, because this is a 9 million person city that is also the capital, it has to manage a lot of people. So they get their own local legislature to form the Congress of Mexico City, which has its own constitution, its own governor. Then they get representation in their Senate and Chamber of Deputies in the Mexican Congress. But Mexico City isn't a state, and the federal legislature certainly has their thumb on the scale of what can and cannot be done in Mexico City. It is effectively a state, but with a few asterisks. Now it's time to head over to Europe, the Federal Republic of Germany. Germany has 16 states divided into area states like Bavaria and Saxony, and city-states like Berlin and Hamburg. Obviously, the city and state governments are one and the same for Berlin because, well, look at it. With a Senate and House of Representatives. So, some German words coming up that I'm not going to pronounce correctly. The Bundestag meets in the Reichstag building for all of Germany. This is their equivalent of a House of Commons, or a House of Representatives, or a Chamber of Deputies. Well, the Bundesrat of Germany meets in the Prussian House of Lords, which is also a building in Berlin. This is a case where the capital is its own state, so it does get representation in the legislature. Germany's neighbor Austria is also a federal republic. I do find it funny that Vienna is a federal capital, and it has federal state affairs and city affairs that it has to keep separate, despite them being basically the same people running the show for the state level and city level. I imagine them doing the Doc Shu Bushi thing from Avatar, where they just put on different hats in order to keep the affairs separate. And yes, Vienna does have representation in the Austrian parliament. That's also located in Vienna. To return to this end of the globe, let's talk about Brazil. Brasilia is the capital of Brazil and the federal district as a whole. And the Brazilian constitution specifies that the federal district is not a true state, though it does give it some state-like powers in order to balance out the whole, okay, we can't bog ourselves down with all these smaller affairs that you guys need to deal with, so we're just going to delegate them to you. And yes, they do get representation in both the lower and upper houses of the Brazilian legislature. So we covered Canada, Mexico, Germany, Austria, and Brazil. I could go on with other states such as Ethiopia, who the capital of Addis Ababa have representation in the equivalent of the House of Representatives called the House of People's Representatives, but not the House of Federation, which is the equivalent of their Senate, because this is a chartered city, equivalent of like a federal district, though it does have two chartered cities, so make of that what you will about Ethiopia's political system. I'm not going to get into it. But a similar thing can be said with India, where it has union territories, territories administered by the Indian federal government as opposed to being a state, getting representation in the lower house of legislature, but only some of those union territories have representation in their upper house, their equivalent of a senate. We can go on and on about all the federal republics of the world, but honestly, why should I? What exactly is the conclusion that you want me to draw here? All these countries agree that the federal capital deserves representation in whatever legislature they have. Where they disagree is how much self-rule the district should have. Are they a state, as in the case of Austria and Germany, or are they a mere federal district, such as Mexico and Brazil? And should they get representation in a Senate, a body that is supposed to represent states, like what Ethiopia did, where Addis Ababa doesn't get representation in their equivalent of the Senate? Meanwhile, in America, we have a federal district that gets electoral college votes, but it doesn't get substantive representation in either the House of Representatives or the Senate, just has non-voting delegates. You can say the Founding Fathers didn't intend for DC to become a state. To that I say, Mexico City and Brasilia are federal districts similar to what we do in America, but they give their people in the capital representation in their legislatures. I know there's going to be that guy in the comments saying, LOL, that's why for all 1984 style dystopias. To that I say, you don't know how systems of government works. That's not how this works. That's not how any of this works. Those are just my thoughts. Please consider liking, subscribing, tipping the channel on Ko-fi. This is Cyril signing off.